In 1940, the Merchants Association thought Wadsworth was a picture-perfect city and decided it would be the perfect setting for a fictionalized story of a beauty contest, with Durling Park, centralized school, and the Disciple and Reformed churches. The movie centered on Wadsworth's annual Miss Wadsworth contest with a fictionalized cast of characters. The merchants met out front of Brenneman's to dictate a telegram to be sent to the famous director Gary Owens. In the center is Farland Nicodemus. On the right, J.W. Stonier. And on the left, Bank President T.J. Sailors. And with his ever-present cigar, Dr. H.T. Pease. The telegram is rushed to the Western Union office, then in the Strand Theater building. And is sent to California, to the office of Gary Owens, played here by Eldon Williams. Gary Owens is thrilled at the prospect of coming to Wadsworth, and immediately sees the possibilities of judging the beauty contest. In Wadsworth, the news is met with excitement. And everyone is thrilled at the prospect, except newsboy Dick Schmidt. Here Lizette, always the bridesmaid, never the bride, learns of the news and decides this is the perfect opportunity for her to display her charms.
No, you haven't stumbled on the movie channel. Welcome to In Touch. I'm Lucy Sondels. With me today is David Rodich, Wadsworth historian, and he has brought some movies and some pictures that relate to Wadsworth in the movies. This is March, this is the Academy Awards month, and we're going to take that angle. Right, David? Okay. Let's go ahead with some of the pictures here that David's brought, and we'll continue to see the rest of the movie that was shown at the beginning of this program.
Well, the first movies in Wadsworth, the first motion pictures, were shown in a room of the sheep sheds, which was a low-frame building of 5 storerooms on the northwest corner of the square. And they were shown occasionally as they became available.
Now, this is one of the first movie theaters.
Well, it wasn't technically a movie theater. Movies were shown there, but just on a periodic basis. It wasn't set up as a regular theater. Movies were also shown at that time in the Rickard Block, which is now the American Legion building with the Title Bureau on the ground floor. But this was just a sporadic showing of films. The first regular theater in Wadsworth
This is the next picture here, right? Okay.
Was opened in 1905 by J.M. Browse in the south room of the Mensch Block on Main Street, where Bike and Stuff is now located.
Okay,
and just in the corner of the picture, you can see the opening at the front of the theater.
Did it seat very many people? Was it very large?
I don't know an exact capacity, but I wouldn't think that it was very large at that time, and people probably sat on folding chairs or benches. But it was very popular and continued to operate until 1918. It was called at one time the Edsonia Picture House because most of the early films were produced by Thomas Edison. It was also known as the Star Theater, and then later as the Family Theater, and then it reverted back to the Star Theater shortly before it was closed.
Did they have all these different names because of the owners?
It changed hands several times, though Browse owned it the longest time. He owned it until about 1913 when it was sold to a man named Dunlap. But just different. And
kind of reflected the times, perhaps?
Certainly, different names for different businesses.
Was this the kind that had a piano or an organ that a woman would play during the silent picture?
I suspicion that they did have a piano to accompany that.
My aunt used to do that. She used to play the organ for the movie theater.
This is a picture of the Opera House shortly before it was raised in 1935. And when Joe Bender bought the Opera House in 1913 from Dr. Detweiler, he immediately began showing movies on a regular basis. And they became so popular that they essentially replaced stage shows until the Opera House closed in 1923. I think we have also a picture of the interior.
Okay, I'll show the interior also, and we'll talk a little bit about the Opera House here.
This is a picture from the stage looking out towards the back of the Opera House.
It has a balcony there, right? And
yes.
It looks like it had a pretty good capacity.
Well, it was built in 39 working days in 1895 to accommodate a minstrel show. And Dr. Detweiler decided that he was going to bring that form of entertainment to Wadsworth, and once he set his mind to something, he accomplished it.
Okay, I'm going to go back to the Opera House for just a minute here, and if you can get a picture of that. And tell us, where is this located?
That was located on South Lyman Street on the corner of what would now be Wright Drive. South Lyman Street is the road that you can see coming through the foreground, and Wright Drive would run along the side. After Joe Bender sold it in 1923 to the Wadsworth Amusement Company, they closed it. And it sat empty for approximately 12 years until it was raised in 1935. That's why it's in such a dilapidated condition in this building. But all of the graduations were held there from 1896 until 1922, when the auditorium was built at the high school. And it was a gathering place for all types of community functions. The 1914 Centennial Celebration of Wadsworth was held there. Tom Thumb
Tom Thumb appeared here in Wadsworth?
Appeared in Wadsworth on several occasions, and William Jennings Bryan, the silver-tongued orator and three-time presidential contender, packed the house to the roof in 1919.
And it was all here at the Opera House. Did they ever have an opera here at the Opera House?
Yes, he gave operatic performances. The Marine Band performed there. Different symphony orchestras were there. It was quite a beautiful place in its day.
Yeah. Did I misunderstand, but this picture was taken before it was raised?
Just before. You can see that there's several windows missing, and it's rather weather-beaten. It had been in disuse at that point for 12 years.
Yeah.
Now, in 1915, William Standen began construction of his Broad Street Theater on the south side of Broad Street. And at that time, the theater contained two we think of the idea of twin cinemas or multi-cinemas as being a modern innovation. But when the Broad Street Theater was built, it had twin cinemas. It also had bowling alleys, a barber shop, and a small snack shop. And then in 1920, he decided that one room would be more suitable, and he combined the two small theaters into one large one, the two small rooms into one large room, and eliminated the bowling alleys. At that time also, I think I mentioned, there was a barber shop in the building, which was run by the Jackson brothers.
Did he show separate movies then in each of the theaters simultaneously as they do nowadays?
Right, different movies. Perhaps a Western in one side and a dramatic film in another. But as I say, he remodeled that in 1920. Then in 1922, he sold that out to the Wadsworth Amusement Company.
Can you talk a little bit about that? I've never even heard of the Wadsworth Amusement Company.
Well, it was under the management, the general management of a fellow named John Damm, D-A-M-M, and it was headed by N.B. Stein. Norm Stein was born in Wayne County and was orphaned at the age of 11, but overcame his problems and educated himself and became quite a businessman, involving himself in real estate and insurance and in the automobile agency, and also served as Wadsworth mayor from 1942 to 1944. But he was the actual head of the company, while John Damm was the manager of it. And it was this company that I mentioned earlier had purchased the Opera House from Joe Bender in 1923. After they purchased the Broad Street Theater from William Standen, they changed the name to the Strand Theater, which is the name by which we knew it.
And this is at the location that we can see now.
It's the same building.
The same building.
Same building.
Okay, and they were just kind of a monopoly on entertainment in Wadsworth?
Exactly.
Is that the way to put it?
And this is a theater card from the Strand Theater, showing the films that were available in February of 1931.
Can you see some of those? I can't read them here.
Well, you have Call of the Flesh being shown on the 1st and 2nd with Raymond Navarro. On the 6th and 7th, you had Ken Maynard, the cowboy star, in The Wagon Master. On the 17th, 18th, and 19th, you have Joan Crawford, Bob Armstrong, and Marie Prevost starring in Paid.
So this was shown on a continuous basis, and it was showed all through the week.
It was very unusual for movies at that time to be held for more than a day. Now, here we see some of them being kept 2 or 3 days.
Kept over a couple days.
The last movie, incidentally, shown in the Opera House was called The Wagon Train, and it was held for 4 days, which at that time was
considered a real holdover. Huh?
It was a very popular film.
Do they say on this how much the price of admission is? I don't see
No,
that.
I don't know, but I would assume it was probably about 5 or 10 cents
5 or 10
at the
cents.
most at that time, because that was 1931 would have been right in the middle of the Depression,
right.
and that was one of the few amusements that people had, was going to the movies.
Okay, here's another smaller picture here, if we can get this, Mike.
Now, the Strand Theater was then purchased by a man named Earl Seitz from Sandusky, and he sent John Wohler to Wadsworth to manage his theaters for him, and shortly after that, he purchased the old Ford garage, which was on the corner of College and Wautroosa, and converted it into a theater, which was called the Star, and showed primarily Western movies.
Okay,
you can just see a little bit of the Star there. Fortunately, it's not a very clear picture. Shortly after my parents were married, when movies at that time were about 50 cents apiece, my father took my mother to a Western, and he accidentally gave the ticket seller a $5 bill instead of a $1 bill, and didn't get his change. And until the day he died, he complained about the fact that he had paid $5 for 2 people to get into a movie. I don't know what he'd say about the
$12 cost if he was going now. Right. Just can we have this picture up just one more time? As aside from the movie theme that we're doing right now, could you explain why there's so many people and so many cars in this picture?
Well, as I mentioned, unfortunately, this was the best picture I could get of the Star Theater. It shows in the background Admiral Byrd's snow cruiser, which was coming through on its way to Antarctica. And the drivers stopped in Wadsworth for lunch, and it gave the whole population an opportunity to come out and see this
historic vehicle.
Exactly. And we have a lot of pictures of it coming through town, but this is the only one where it doesn't block the theater.
Oh, that's great.
And because of all of the, like in a lot of towns, young ladies and young men were inspired to try and get into the movies. And we had several people from Wadsworth who went on to star in films. One child who first made her debut as an infant was a girl named Marilyn Pearl Skinner, whose mother was a Harvey and had moved to Medina when her father became county engineer. But little Marilyn appeared at 10 months old, the age of 10 months, in the Marx Brothers movie Monkey Business in 1931.
I wonder how many people, because it's a very popular movie, I wonder how many people knew she was in it.
I don't know how well she's shown. I'll have to go back and look at the movie again. But there were several others, young people. Everyone thought that their little girl or little boy was the next Shirley Temple or Jackie Cooper or Jackie Coogan. And a lot of people made the trip to Hollywood and came back disappointed. But there were several people who went on from Wadsworth to appear in movies.
When she appeared in Monkey Business and it was shown around here in Wadsworth, I'm sure it was probably publicized that she was in it. It was
covered in the newspapers at the time, so I'm sure that people did go to the theater just to try and pick out the little 10-month-old child. Her grandparents, the McClures, still lived in Wadsworth at that time on Main Street, so I'm sure a lot of their friends and family went to see her.
What do we see here? We have
another man who is one of these people whose face is familiar, but whose name may not be, and that's Paul Fix, who was married to a Wadsworth woman.
I'll try to center this here.
He began his acting career in 1928 in his native New York on the stage. He went to Hollywood later that year and starred with Mae West on stage productions. His first film role was the silent The Big Kiss with Gary Cooper and Fay Wray. In his career, he starred in over 300 films. He was a personal friend and business partner of John Wayne. In fact, it was John Wayne who introduced him to his second wife. there's the story that John Wayne always liked to have Paul Fix in his films. And when they were filming Fort Apache, Wayne was concerned because he had quite a problem with gambling and drinking and wasn't sure he was just up to this performance. So he worked out an elaborate set of hand signals and gestures that Fix was supposed to give him from the sidelines to prompt him or cue him with his lines. And the director, John Ford, caught on to this. And when it came time for Fix to do a rather dangerous stunt, insisted that he repeat it again and again and again until he was bloody and bruised and caught on to what Ford was up to and refused to do it another time. And Ford told him if he did not do it again that he would never be in another one of his pictures, and in fact he never was.
He refused to do it again then.
Paul Fix also appeared in The Giant with Elizabeth Taylor and Rock Hudson and James Dean, and in the movie classic To Kill a Mockingbird he played the judge in the trial scene which occupies so much of that film. And he later appeared in television. He died in 1981, but his daughter, Marilyn, by his first wife, is married, lives in Sherman Oaks, California, and is married to the actor Harry Carey Jr., who, like his father, Harry Carey Sr., is quite a movie star.
That's amazing. I had no idea that Paul Fix, because he is a character actor and his face is quite familiar. I just didn't know that he was from Wadsworth.
Well, as I told you before we started, I checked through a number of books to try and find a photograph of him, a large photograph, and he's mentioned in at least 15 or 20 books that I looked in, and is mentioned numerous times, but no pictures of him appeared.
Okay, but you were lucky enough to find this book, which has pictures of character actors. Right, and that's why that picture was so small.
And of course, currently in Wadsworth, we have Nancy Everhard, who's a graduate of Wadsworth High School, the daughter of Dr. Richard and the Reverend Martha Everhard, who has made quite a career for herself in modeling and both stage and television and movie acting. Here she's seen in a scene with Greg Evigan from Deep Star 6. And she just finished up a 4-day stint on the afternoon soap opera Santa Barbara. But she has, for a young lady, she has quite an acting career ahead of her.
Exactly, and she's very beautiful, just like her mother.
Yes.
Okay, and we have a last picture here that ties back into the movie that we will be seeing.
Well, the movie that we're seeing today, We're in the Movies, was made in 1940 by the Wadsworth Merchants Association to publicize their buildings and also to act as a setting for the beauty pageant for that year. In this picture, we see Viola Frere Bell, one of the contestants, selling the first ticket to acting Mayor Dave Rohr, who was president of City Council. I'm sorry, that is Margaret Holben. Viola Frere Bell is over here. And
who's that lovely lady?
Lizette, who is played in this film by Fred Hartman Jr., a longtime Wadsworth photographer, is now a resident of New York and will probably never speak to me again.
Yes, you have a lot of long-distance phone calls. How did you get a hold of this movie, this 1940 movie?
Well, in fact, I'd looked for this movie for quite some time after reading about its filming in
And you read about that, how you found out, yeah.
And was unable to find any trace of it. And then I contacted Stanley Parker in Florida about another film that his father had made, and he called to say that he had located it and was sending it. But when the film arrived, it turned out to be this film instead of the one that I had anticipated. Okay, and what's the difference between the two films? I've kind of lost here. Oh, I'm sorry. The one that I had requested from him, I learned that his father, L.E. Parker, who was an employee of the Match Company, had filmed what was supposed to be one of the finest films of the 125th anniversary celebration in 1939. So I wrote to Mr. Parker to ask him whether or not he had that film. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I got the wrong one. Now this film, the basis of this film is this beauty contest is being held with the winner going to Hollywood and having a chance to appear in a movie. Now Joe, who we'll see in a minute, played by Joe Doyle, is sure that his girl, Mary the maid, played by Betty McDermott McIlvaine, is the most beautiful girl in town, and the director will not have any choice but to choose her. And if she goes to Hollywood and becomes a famous movie star, what chance will he have? So he bribes the judge not to vote for her. And it's just as the community is getting ready to they're putting up the signs of welcome for Gary Owens that we rejoin our film.
Okay, let's see the film again.
The Wadsworth Fire Department assisted the city officials in placing banners and signs of welcome. We see Fire Chief P.M. Weinsheimer in the white hat. Joe Bender, who we mentioned is owner of the Opera House. Joe Neath, the safety director, Tom Lucas, the police chief, and Jerry Hall, the mayor. Mary the maid, played by Benny McDermott McIlvaine, learns of Gary Owens' impending arrival from the Wadsworth News. And she sees a place for herself in the movies also. Joe is not too happy by Mary's plans as they begin shopping for their household. Their first stop is Stonier's Jewelers, which was then, as now, on College Street. Here the proprietor, Bill Stonier, waits on the happy couple. And the next stop is at the Citizens Bank, where they're greeted by Bank President Tom Sailors. Here employee Leonard Kreider decides to see that all of the bank's treasures, including clerk Jeanette Weinsheimer-Kaler, safely locked away, while his father, cashier Lloyd Kreider, transacts business. In the background is Gertrude Harder Reichard, who at the time was the assistant cashier of the bank. The next stop was to Helmick Reese Furniture on the site of the present Tony's on the Square restaurant. Formerly Good and Bixler Undertaking and Furniture and Vinifrock Helmick. The store was then owned by Clifford Helmick, who's shown here assisting the young couple, and his partner Clifford Reese, who sold the business in 1943 to enter World War II. Here Leonard Helmick demonstrates some of the latest in bedroom furnishings. The next stop is at Hoagland's Hardware, select appliances for their new home. After spending all this money, you work up quite an appetite, so a stop at Zarl's lunch counter is in order. On the stool next to the couple is Sue Morrison, who many will remember as the advertising manager and society editor of the Wadsworth News Banner. Behind the counter is Vera Gwynn Smith and Sarah Gorman Cassidy. Zarl's was in the south room of the building now occupied by Dr. Robert Guthrie as a dental office. The center room at that time was Ladrak's Shoes, which would expand into the restaurant in 1943. The north room was Nielsen's Jewelers, which was later sold to Wolf's Jewelry. I'm not going to comment.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Making their appearance are Charlotte Overholt, Viola Frere Bell, Ruth Weinsheimer Snyder, Helen Allen Liebert, Ruby McElroy Razor, Vivian Clifford White, Margaret Holben, and Betty Clifford Leonard. And of course, Fred Hartman Jr. as Lizette.
That was definitely Fred Hartman's color. How was the film shown?
Well, the movie was professionally produced by the John Rogers Company, the same ones who put on Wadsworth anniversary celebration last year, also the celebrations in 1939 and 1964. Their association with Wadsworth goes back to 1925, so even by 1940, people were familiar with their company's work. Although in this film, the winner of the contest, who of course we learned was Mary. Oh, I didn't tell you how the movie ended.
Yeah, that's not the end, I know that.
Oh, I didn't tell you how it ended. This movie was shown in two parts at a premiere at the high school with floodlights and chauffeured cars and a white way leading up to Dallas Trent, who at the microphone did interviews with the stars and other celebrities in the crowd. And then the first part of the film was shown, then the actual winner of the contest was announced, and then the second part of the film was shown. We don't have the second part of the film. When Mr. Parker sent this part to me, the film to me, I wrote back to him and asked whether or not he might have the second part, and he does not. So this is where the film ends. But I've done my homework and I know how it comes out.
You knew I'd ask you.
When Gary Owens looked over the photographs and looked over the contestants, even though he didn't know the names, he had no choice but to pick Mary because she was the most beautiful one, and took her off to Hollywood, signed her to a contract, but it was all right because there was a part in the film for Joe, too, and they lived happily ever after. The actual winner of the contest, which was done by a community vote rather than by the fictitious Gary Owens, was Ruby McElroy, who's now Mrs. Ken Razor, and she was kind enough to allow us to borrow this loving cup, which she received on that occasion.
I think they're going to get a shot of it.
It's a little bit shiny to see.
Was she surprised? I imagine she was.
That this film surfaced after so many years, and she saw it last night. She stopped by the house and saw for the first time in 50 years. And today, outside of my family and a couple of other people, this is the first time the film's been shown to our knowledge. I should also mention at this point that I'm always grateful to the help of Evelyn Fiskus Kindig. Evelyn has a great love and interest in Wadsworth history and is always at the ready to volunteer her services for anything that needs to be done. She manned the registration cabin in the celebration last year and had done the same thing in 1964. And I've called on her many times because she has a wonderful memory for names and places and who's related to one another, and she bails me out on more than one occasion. She helped me get some of the names together on this film. But hopefully, in time, the second part of the film will surface.
If anybody out there knows of where the other part of the film is, please let David know. You could call here at the studio or call his house.
When I found out that this was missing, and also a few other films that I wanted, I contacted the Rogers Company, and they told me that they have never maintained a film vault.
Oh,
if a community orders one copy of a film, they make one. If they order two, they make two, but they keep none for their own records. So unless somebody else has the other half floating around somewhere, and this is, I was told by Homer Baldwin, who's Wadsworth's resident movie maker, that this is a positive film, that this is the original. So I don't know if there were any other copies produced at that time or not.
Well, let's hope the rest of it will surface for you sometime, too. March 17th is an important part of Wadsworth, and we can end on that note.
Well, as people
catch this photograph
are aware, because of the celebration put on by Dr. Gary Bernard and his committees last year, Wadsworth is 176 years old this year, and the Benjamin Dean, who's seen here, actually as a lad of 15 felled the first tree in Wadsworth on the 1st of March, 1814, and in company with other men put the first cabin under roof on the 17th of March, St. Patrick's Day, which is recognized as the date of Wadsworth's founding. And one of those pioneers, the Reverend Edward Brown, wrote back from a pastorate in Minnesota a series of articles for the local newspaper called Recollections of My Boyhood. And at the end of one of these, he suggested that a celebration be held, a 60th anniversary celebration, a homecoming. And this idea was taken up, and all of the pioneers then living and their descendants were invited back to Wadsworth to a 3-day celebration at the expense of the community, where they had picnics and lectures, and they read correspondence from people who weren't able to attend. They read addresses from some of the older people who were present but unable to speak. They took all of the pioneers by carriage around to their homesteads and their pioneer farms, and also to the cemeteries to visit the graves of loved ones. And it was decided that this should all be written into the form of a history, but nothing was ever done about it. And when Brown returned to Wadsworth the next year as pastor of the Wadsworth Congregationalist Church, he accepted the responsibility of compiling a record of the celebration together with a history of Wadsworth and genealogies of some of the local families. Then he left the next year to accept another pastorate in Iowa, and not much was ever done with the book. And the publisher, or the printer, John Clark, had to give away copies of the book with his newspaper to get rid of them.
To get rid of them?
Now, this is an original copy of the Wadsworth Memorial that Brown wrote in 1874, but it was reprinted in 1971, and copies are available on loan from the library if people want to get a first-hand account of Wadsworth history.
But this is your personal copy?
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful. And this is the one that Edward Brown had compiled.
It's a very well-written book and contains a lot of information that, had he not taken the time to do so, would have been lost to us, because he knew his father, Judge Frederick Brown, was the first settler down here at the center of Wadsworth. His cousin was John Brown, the abolitionist, and so he knew many of the pioneers, not only of Wadsworth, but of the surrounding communities, and so was able to give us an accurate account. And there are very few mistakes in the book.
Well, that's great. I want to thank David for being with us. As always, he is a master of surprises, and I'm delighted that we did Wadsworth and the movies.
I thought that maybe we could stop for lunch afterwards. I happen to have a menu from Zarl's restaurant that we saw in the movie.
Oh, you're kidding.
And I see here that we can get a couple of hamburgers and some coffee and perhaps a couple of banana splits if you think they'd have change for $1.
Oh, no.
My treat.
David, I'll go. Thank you. For In Touch, I'm Lucy Sondel.